If you're working someplace else for weeks or months, and there are none of these laws that apply to you, you need to be ready to pay income tax in those other states. CSP2, this is Matthew Cersley, the Agorist tax advisor, here to answer another listener question. Question: could you explain the tax implications of the Amtrak ruling? Details: I live in New Hampshire and worked in Vermont as a CDL commercial driver. I drive in both states. Another employee at my company was told by a tax professional about the Amtrak ruling. I was told that we do not have to pay a VA state income tax because he lived in New Hampshire. Is it true I do not need to pay an income tax? Generally, yes, although it probably is, I think, the Amtrak rule or Amtrak law that you're talking about, not a particular court ruling. So first of all, let's talk about basics. Normally, if you work in a state, that state can tax the income you earn there, even if you don't live there. This really sucks for people who travel for work. My father was a traveling consultant doing computer stuff. We lived in Texas, but he regularly had to file New York and California income taxes for the time he was working in another state. This really screws professional athletes and entertainers as well. By the way, watch out. New York is particularly nasty about this, that if you are a remote worker working for a New York company, they may say you owe the income tax. Just another reason to avoid New York. However, the federal government passed some rules for certain people that change this default rule. And so the first one that I'm aware of is the Amtrak Act. It's a federal law that says states cannot tax the wages of a non-resident if they work for a motor carrier or a rail carrier and they perform their duties in more than one state and they do something regarding transportation. So this law applies to you. You live in one state, you work in multiple states, you drive for them, no state income taxes on any state other than the state you reside in, and that's New Hampshire, which has no income tax. So yes, you should be free of Vermont taxes. However, there are rules about who is covered and who isn't. The basics are you have to be a W-2 employee of a motor or rail carrier, and you have to perform duties of driving for that company in multiple states. So if you are a 1099 contractor, paid just and you do report everything on a Schedule C, this does not apply to you. Hint, if you create a company and hire yourself as an employee and pay yourself a W-2, well, at least that W-2 part now is not taxable, though some of your business profits may be. This also does not apply if you live in one state and work in another state. So if you live in New Hampshire, but all of your driving is in Vermont, then Vermont can tax your income. This does not apply to any portion of your compensation having to do with remote work, consulting, or dispatching. It only counts when you are physically on or using or moving or loading or unloading a truck or a rail car. Now, this is not the only law that works this way. There are other laws that are similar to this. The best other one I know about is a similar law that applies to people in the military and their spouses. So if you are a military spouse and you have a job and you have to go to another state because your spouse has been transferred there, that new state is not supposed to tax your income. Now, a lot of the times they do because you need to jump through some hoops for this law to actually apply to you, file some forms, but, this is absolutely fantastic. There is a similar thing that actually applies to people in the military or people in the reserve who are forced to go someplace else. And maybe they're doing a job on the side because it's like, yeah, you're here, but you have off time. Your income cannot be taxed outside of your main state of residence. There's also a similar law that applies to pilots and flight crews for not paying in multiple states. But watch out, that only applies to state income tax. If you end up flying to other countries, there may be income tax on that income. Finally, there's a very narrow law that talks about pension income, and just it says that states can't tax retirement income of non-residents. And again, that's because normally you get taxed based on your time in a state. So let's say you were, visiting another state for 30 days and you had a job in that state, they could charge you, tax on that income. That doesn't apply to pension income only. Um, Now, again, this gets a little bit complicated if you're an owner operator. If you're just a regular owner operator doing this on a Schedule C, you're going to pay income tax on every single state. Another reason why, as a truck driver, I can't think of a single reason you should be operating as a Schedule C instead of as an S Corp somehow. My reading of the law, and it is a bit ambiguous, is that it does only apply to the W-2 salary portion. So if you're doing the standard tax trick with an S Corp and saving money by not paying all those employment taxes, you will owe income tax on that portion. I don't think there's any situation where you aren't still saving money by doing that. But I would double check if you're in California or New York or New Jersey or Portland or other areas where there might be a business tax or where there might be some sort of a city or county tax. So if you are a driver and you don't have a CPA or an attorney, get one. You want to be able to make sure you're doing all this correctly. So for your actual question, as far as I can tell in your case, yeah, you should not be paying any income taxes in New Hampshire. And oh, by the way, you can file amended returns in most states up to 3 years after they're due to get that money back if you have been paying. So I would definitely do that. If you are a normal person who none of these laws apply to, it's a little bit trickier. Technically, you do need to pay income tax on any income you earn from other states. Now, if you work 2 days in another state, are they going to know? Probably not. Even if they do, most states do have some sort of a standard deduction where you still won't owe. But if you're working someplace else for weeks or months and there are none of these laws that apply to you, you need to be ready to pay income tax in those other states.